All right, so today we're going to start our lecture talking about conclusions. Now, since I'm not there to recap with you in person, I'm going to kind of go over briefly what we talked about on Monday, and then we'll go ahead and get into our lecture on conclusions. Hopefully this is the only video in the series, but do be aware there might be multiple. So first off, when we were talking about audience analysis, we talked about the importance of understanding where the audience is coming from, what you need to do in order to tailor your message to them. And we talked about the four people involved in an audience analysis that we care about for the purpose of this paper. First, our primary author. We want to make sure that we know who's writing this paper. Our gatekeeper. We want to know what requirements are expected of us in our paper. Our audience, our primary audience, we want to make sure who we know we're addressing ourselves to. Our stakeholders, we want to make sure that we know who's involved in whatever it is that we have to say. Now, hopefully, as we did the audience analysis homework, as we worked on all of that, we were able to get a better understanding of how to communicate with these people, how to make ourselves understood to them. In continuation of that idea of making ourselves understood, making ourselves communicative with our audience, we're going to talk a little bit about fleshing out more of our outline. Now, I have said in the past that I didn't want you to work on your conclusions. I didn't want you to work on your introductions. And some of you have followed along with that, others not so much. But what I'm looking for is I want you to have the meat of your outline ready to go and essentially think of the conclusion and the introduction as the sandwich bread that is going to go on at the very end. It's very important for the sandwich, it's very important for what we have, but ultimately we've got to make sure that all of our meat is cooked and all of our veggies are chopped up and so on and so forth. Introductions should just about always be the last thing that you write in any paper, especially as you're working towards a draft. So we're going to start today with conclusions. Now you'll see that we're here at our good friend, the Owl at Purdue, where they talk a little bit about conclusions. Conclusions are something that you've been doing probably for many years. It's probably something you've had to write for all of your papers, and your teachers have probably told you a lot of different things about them. That they are summaries of your paper, or that they're an attempt to find closure with your audience, or essentially the same thing as the introduction, except in reverse. And all of those are true, but they don't quite get at what I want us to focus on today, which is how we can see conclusions and view them in four short general steps that are nonetheless going to help us better understand how we can perform the thing it is that we want to perform, how we can do the thing that is we want to do. So, generally speaking, there are four things your conclusions can do. Here they are. You should see them pretty clearly in that list there. Now, the first two are absolutely 100% required. If you plan on getting anything other than an F on this paper, your conclusion better have at least these two things. The other two are somewhat optional, and I'll talk about when you use them, when you don't use them, and why they're still important. Now, the important thing to keep in mind with conclusion is that you want to try to make this as smooth a transition as possible. You don't want to just suddenly say your last thing, make some sort of final statement about your solution, and then just say thank you for your time and end. Right? One of the best examples I've heard of a conclusion is that it is very much like a car ride, in that when you're getting a ride from your Uber driver, you don't want them to just drop you off at the curb by throwing open their door, not slowing down, and pushing you out. That's not going to be very successful. But at the same time, you don't want the driver to pull over and then proceed to keep talking with you for another 15 minutes. That's not desirable either. We want it to be this nice, easy transition in from our topics and from our solutions and from our problems to kind of why they all matter, why we're talking about them, to a final what we can do about it, and now you can stop reading the paper. So the first step in that is essentially a summary. Now Purdue calls it a restatement of your topic and why it's important. But an essential part of summaries is that they're covering all of the main points and why those main points are significant, why those main points matter, why they're important, right? It is your job as an author, as a writer, to communicate with your audience and to help them understand continually through your paper why they're reading what it is they're reading, what the purpose of it is, and that should absolutely happen at the end of the paper as well. Remind your audience of your main points. Remind them of what you're talking about, why you're talking about it, and help them understand why they need to know all of these things. You should be doing that in 1 or 2 sentences, fairly brief, very specific, and very detailed. Second thing that I absolutely must see in your papers is a restatement of your thesis or your claim. Essentially, this is the thesis statement said in a slightly different way, very similar to the qualifier in the Tolman model. The qualifier, if you remember, was all about adding additional depth or complexity to what it is you're saying, and it should be doing the same thing at the end of your essay. You have spent a good chunk of time talking about whatever it is that you want to do, talking about whatever ideas it is that you want to implement, talking about whatever solutions it is that you have. And this is an opportunity for you to say the same thing you've said before, but yet again in a slightly different, condensed, detailed, and specific way. This should be the thing that your audience leaves the discussion with. They should be able to look at the paper after they finish reading it and say, yeah, that's what it was about. Now, those 2 things are absolutely important, and as far as I'm concerned, in order of importance, this is most important, this is second most important. Now, for these other 2, I've said before that they're somewhat optional. They're still very important. We'll talk about them. We'll talk about how you can use them in your paper, especially how I want them seen in your paper. The first one is address opposing viewpoints and explain why readers should align with your position. This is much like the rebuttal of the Tolman argument in that you are helping your audience understand that you know that there might be objections to your solution or there might be denials of your problem, but that ultimately you think something needs to be done. So this is an opportunity for you to introduce naysayers, to introduce opposing viewpoints, to introduce counterclaims, and then be able to alleviate those doubts, be able to clear up those opposing viewpoints, and be able to understand better to your readers why ultimately you are right, why they should agree with you. And this can be a very important and very delicate but very effective way to use your conclusion. I would expect, A students to aim for this and perform it well. Now, this last bit, the call for action or the call to action, is kind of what I expect to see in this paper and what I would hope to see from all of my B students. But do be aware that an overview of future research possibilities does happen. As you get into your careers, depending on where you go, some of you might be getting into academia or might be getting into the sciences, in which case, looking at future research possibilities would be very important. But for our purposes, we want to make sure that our solution isn't something that just sounds nice on paper, but instead it's something very specific, something with intent, something that really means something. Now, a call to action can help wrap all of that up. It can help the audience understand what it is that they're supposed to be doing now that they've finished reading your paper. Now that they've heard about the problem, they've heard about the solution, what can they do about it? Should they go and contact their local senator? Should they go and petition the city council to make something happen? Should they go onto their Facebook page and change their status? Because heaven knows Facebook solves everything. We want to make sure that our audience is leaving with some idea of what it is that they can do, what it is they should be doing, and a call to action is a great way to implement those. Now, as I said before, there is an order of preference here, and I'll talk about that a little bit. I think, we'll do a future video. So before we close this video, I want to really make sure you understand this restatement of your topic, this summary, is most important to me. Next, this restatement of your thesis, your claim, that's still important to me, but not quite as important as that summary. A call to action, I would absolutely love to see in your paper. I'd be very happy if you were able to do it well. It'd be very good. Addressing opposing viewpoints and explaining why readers should align with your position, this rebuttal or this counterclaim, is a little bit trickier, and it's not going to necessarily happen in the same paragraph as the other things, but it's still part of the conclusion. So it's good, it's important, I want you to know about it, I want you even to try it if you can, but it is the least important of those four to me for this paper. Alright, so in our next video we'll talk a little bit about how you can put those into your outline. I'll show you a little bit of what I've been doing with a kind of mock outline and how the conclusion can fit into that, how you can start to build your conclusions for our rough draft at the end of this week.